Hi, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you caught the last episode where we discussed the meaning of stamp duty. In this episode, I'll be sharing with you what related costs there are with any land or property transaction. We get a lot of questions, especially from our diaspora buyers, about, so you're selling this land for 1.89 million shillings. How much is it going to cost me total by the time I get my title deed? Keep watching for the answer. I'm Solomon Wangwe, you're watching Own Land in Kenya. So we're selling land at 1.89 million shillings in Nanyuki, right? What other costs are related to that? Is that the total cost? Is that all I'm going to pay for me to get my title deed to my new property? Or am I going to have to spend a little bit more? And if so, what's the amount? So in general, legal fees or legal costs are supplemental to a purchase price. That's not to say that you couldn't negotiate for everything to be bunched up in the purchase price, because a lot of land sellers, especially in Kenya, will advertise a particular price and say it's a one-time all-inclusive cost. You pay this, you get your title deed, your legal costs are covered, stamp duty, and so on. In that case, the seller has obviously done their math and figured out how much they must have for the dirt that they're selling you or the land that they're selling you. And they've also done the math on how much the legal fees will cost, and they've put that in there with their markup and given you a flat rate. If that's the case, well and good. Just be clear about that. We at Goshen Acquisitions prefer to do it differently. So when we advertise one of our unique investment opportunities, we'll typically share with you the purchase price or our asking price or sale price. And that is not inclusive of legal fees and stamp duty and so on. And the reason for that, because I understand it's easier for us to tell you pay 1.89 million shillings or pay 2 million shillings and that's it and everything is sorted out. That creates a lot of room for what I would call messy business to go on, because there are very specific processes that have to be followed legally and beyond that morally for that transaction to be successfully concluded. And so that's why we'll only advertise our asking price for the actual land that we're selling you. Beyond that, you will need to pay legal fees, and that basically is a combination of 3 different components. The first one being the advocate's professional fees. If you're dealing with a licensed lawyer, as I've often said, make sure you're dealing with a licensed lawyer. Easy to confirm, ask them for their license number with the LSK. Make sure that they are legally sanctioned to practice law in Kenya. They might have lost their license because of malpractice or any number of other reasons, so make sure they are licensed. They will charge you a professional fee as a lawyer for that service. What that fee is, normally regulated by the Law Society of Kenya's remuneration order. And they can also provide you that, or you can simply check out the LSK website for that. And it basically says, in our case, if we're selling you land at 1.89 million shillings, that you will pay the advocate, the licensed advocate, no less than 2% of the value of the transaction for any amount between 1 shilling and 5 million shillings. You will pay 2% and no less. Some lawyers are willing to accept less than that, and while it's up to them to accept less for their professional services, I think it's not only disrespectful to the legal fraternity not to follow the remuneration order, you also generally will get what you pay for. So make sure you pay them well. After all, they studied for years and years to get licensed, sat for the bar and passed. So pay them what they're due. 2% for any amount between 1 shilling and 5 million shillings. So you can do the math, 2% of whatever the asking price is, and that's the advocate's professional fee. Second component of the legal cost will be what they will call VAT at 16%. That's a standard one. Everyone has to charge that, and that goes to the government of Kenya. So the government of Kenya earns something small for each one of these transactions, and that's simple. It's a flat 16% of the advocate's fees. Very important. 16% of the advocate's fees only. Third component, they will generally call disbursements. And disbursements is a loose way of bunching several smaller costs into one amount. So disbursements will cover things like photocopying costs for the advocate. If they have to print sale agreements, it'll include courier costs and fees, because they might have to send a courier with the sale agreements to the other party's advocate and so on. Those are normal. A business has to cover that. But the other thing it'll also cover are registration fees, which are typically paid to the Ministry of Lands for the production of new documents relative to that transaction. So it'll include maybe a 5,000 shilling fee to the Ministry of Lands for specific things, registration of the new title. Other fees might be about 500 to 850 shillings. And the licensed lawyer that you're using should give you receipts for every single one of these amounts. So remember that disbursements will generally be a conglomerate of several different costs. Ask them to break it down to you, because this is where a lot of lawyers, in our opinion and experience, inflate the legal fees. We've dealt with lawyers who will charge us 50,000 shillings for that transaction, and there are other lawyers who will charge you 150,000 shillings for the exact same transactions. The LSK remuneration order already stipulates what they should charge you as a minimum, right? The 16% VAT is a fixed cost, so there's no wiggle room for that. Where they have wiggle room is disbursements, because very often a lot of advocates and law firms will include what they call facilitation fees in the disbursements, and this is what they pay clerks to go and follow up on documents. And in very many cases, sadly, will also include amounts of money that they bribe workers at the registries to expedite the work for their clients. And this is a very convenient way for people like ourselves as land sellers to, in a sense, launder or clean this filthy habit of bribing officials in the government of Kenya to get work done that they're supposed to do anyway. So if I'm selling you land at 1.89 million shillings, I know the title deed generally could take 30, 45, maybe 60 days to get properly produced at the particular registry. But if I pay the registrar whatever they ask, 5, 10, 15, 20,000 shillings to expedite it, and I can have it out the next day, if I don't want to be seen to be bribing, or if I want to hide that expense from my auditors and so on, what I'll do is I'll ask the lawyer to include that in their legal fee, which has a third component called disbursements, where they might fix the rate at, say, 30,000 shillings, knowing full well that registration costs, the courier photocopies might only cost about 10,000 shillings, maybe 11,000 shillings. Where's the rest of the money going to? Ask your lawyer, interrogate them, let them explain what the money is going to, and as much as you can, always ensure that you hold them morally accountable for clean transactions, because lawyers very often could mess you up in that process by doing untoward things or immoral things, which are also illegal, to get the job done for you. I hope that helps. These are the associated costs with a land transaction separate from the land selling price. Again, as I mentioned before, it's not unusual for sellers like ourselves to include that in our asking price if we've ensured that we're covering all our costs. But always investigate, interrogate, ask questions, and hold everyone in that chain accountable, from the seller to the lawyer to the surveyor, whoever it is that's involved in the transaction, to account for every penny that you spend. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, www.goshenacquisitions.com. You could check us out on Facebook, send us comments, including your questions. You can also call us directly at 0700010001. Again, that's 0700010001, and we'll be happy to engage with you. You've been watching Own Land in Kenya. I'm Solomon Wangwe. Stay tuned for more information on strategic land investment.